Thank you for allowing me to be here today, and I actually took a lot of notes on your. I didn't just write down this question. I took a lot of notes on that last session. Very good.
Thank you, sir.
And of course, the intro. It's always, when you got your nose to the grindstone, you have a tendency to not really, I guess, fully grasp what you're doing in the moment. You're just getting the work done. You're there, helping people, doing things. You're busy. You're busy pulling to the train. So when somebody stops and actually reads it out loud, you're like, oh wow, that's pretty cool. So Keith, you talk about, and I'm not really used to this particular format, right? I'm used to a bunch of sweaty guys in a semi-dark environment, asking questions and with it dealing with a really kind of more immediate, time compressed problem solving skill set, right? So if you have any questions at all or anything like that, feel free to bring them up as we go along. Like I said, this really isn't my normal format, so I'm used to a little bit more interaction, if you will. But you talked about being in martial arts and us being martial artists. And of course, I studied many different martial arts over the last 35 years and, got certified in them, taught them. Some of them I became masters in, some of them I became heirs to the system, things like that. And that's really what got me in the door for training, guys in the Department of Defense, because they kind of sought us out and looking to expand on what they did and how they're always looking at how can they make themselves better, at least the top level teams, right? Now, a normal SEAL team or a normal Army Special Forces team, they really kind of get information handed to them by a tier just above them. And that actually does all the research and development and establishes those protocols, what we call TTP, techniques, tactics, and procedures. And so, so they're constantly trying to improve those things, and that's how we got into the game, right? And then over the last 20 years, had the opportunity to train those guys, develop material, help them prepare for very specific things, and then actually get feedback, whether it be watching the ticker across the Fox News go across the bottom of the screen, and I go, I guess that worked. Or, actually next time I was standing in front of them saying, hey, this is what happened. This is what went down. Here are the things that I think we can improve on. What do you think about this? And giving me a feedback loop that has been instrumental in developing and understanding these universal principles and how we can apply them, not just for an elite military special forces team, but how can we boil it down so it's something that's usable for all of us, right? It's usable for people who just want to be a better dad, or want to be a better brother, or want to be a better husband, or want to be a better businessman. And so that's really what we've been trying to do with what we're doing right now. So, and of course, the first question is that we ask ourselves, because I remember standing in front of guys and watching the physical excellence of what as I taught them, watching them just do extremely well relatively to other people, normal people, I'll say civilians. And of course, the very first thing you ask yourself is, what makes these guys better, right? What makes these guys elite, right? And is that question right there began, and that was the very first time I trained them. That question began a 20-year study, right? And of course, you can't ask yourself what makes them elite without also studying what makes them weak, what makes them vulnerable, what are they missing, right? And just like a boxer in the ring, he's doing his best to problem solve, but the coach outside the ring, who's not getting hit, who's not under the extreme time compression of the event, can see things that he can't. And so that's what's given us that same opportunity. Granted, I'm not kicking indoors and shooting people in the face, but I'm getting that feedback as the observer, as the coach. I can analyze that, and I can see strengths and weaknesses in character and training and all these other things. That's been what's fascinating over the whole thing. So, and there are some great things. Like I would say universally, these guys learn very well, right? So people who are open to learning, people who are adaptive, who are not locked down into this is the way it's always be done, this way it must be done, and who are seeking that. That's a very common principle universally amongst these operators. But really what we found is that it boils down, and of course we're talking about more than one team. So although, you know, Navy SEALs is the buzz thing to say, there are many teams, you know, in the Department of Defense that we've worked with, and with, you know, with people outside of the DoD, if you will. So, so if we look across teams, what makes them universally elite, right? And so what I think is it boils down to really three principles that we've kind of found on. One is an amazing sense of preparedness, right? So whenever we're looking at things like, you know, Navy SEALs and Green Beret and Delta Force and, you know, all this other stuff, we asked those guys to go do some pretty superhuman things, right? And people don't realize that if one of those teams goes out in the world, they may only be out in the world for 3 months out of the year. Guess what they're doing the rest of the year? Preparing to go back out in the world, right? So they come back, they have an AAR phase, right, where they talk about what they did, and there's a transition, of course, because another team rolls in and all that stuff happens. But then they immediately begin preparing for the next event, which even though they know that's months and months away, they immediately start that. And there's a series of things that boxes that they have to check that the big Army or the big Navy has decided this is what every single operator must be able to do, right? So you must be in good health. You must be able to shoot. You must be able to skydive. You must be able to scuba dive. You must, you know, be able to drive the vehicle, you know, all those things, right? So there's a checklist. We'll kind of get into that later. But that really is the preparedness phase of it. So, and if we can boil it down to the timeline of the fight, right? There's a pre-fight, and then there's the pre-fight phase. Really, the pre-fight phase begins as soon as you accept personal responsibility for your safety and the safety of your loved ones, right? So, and what that means to, say, an elite operator is they realize that they're going to be in harm's way someday, not if, not maybe, definitely going to be. And during that time, they will personally be responsible for not just their own safety, but for their teammates' safety. So once they recognize that and they take responsibility for it, they're now in the pre-fight phase. That lasts all the way up till you have the actual fight phase, which means a threat has now presented itself to you, and you have actually decided to resist. If you don't decide to resist, there's no fight. It's just simply a murder. But if you decide to resist, then a fight ensues, right? So, and then of course you have the post-fight, and that is where a lot of people have a lot of difficulty, right? So, and that is morally and ethically being solid on their principles so that they can be themselves and be at peace with their actions after the fact, after the fight, so that the people around them matches their morality, so that they're not ostracized by their families or their teammates or their community or their country. Recovering for that and supporting for that. So there's a lot of different things that happen in all that. But I would say that universally what we saw is that winning the fight actually comes down to what you do in the pre-fight, right? What are you doing right now? So we just take that principle, these principles, and say, okay, well, how do you do that? How does Dr. Keith do that? How does Harley Elmore do that? What am I doing to prepare, right? The second thing is personal accountability, right? Personal accountability is as simple as when I shot the target, instead of being right here, the bullet was right here, right? And not going, yeah, that was the wind, that was my optic, that was, you know, whatever. That was me. That's my fault, right? So personal accountability. If I show up out of shape, that's my fault, not anybody else's fault, right? If my bank account isn't managed like it should be, that's my fault. If my family isn't what it should be, That's my fault, right? That's accepting responsibility for your roles and all of those things. Not blaming it on gear, not blaming it on people, not blaming it on circumstances, right? So personal accountability. And then the last thing is a sense of tribe, right? Now in the Navy SEALs, it's referred to as brotherhood, right? And so you'll commonly hear, if you're around them, long live the brotherhood. And it's been an honor to be a part of that and be around that and be accepted into that by the community and to be able to influence their culture. But that sense of brotherhood means that it's not about me, right? It's not about me. It's not about how good I am. One of the sobering facts of being on an elite team like that is as soon as you get a job and you get good at it, it's immediately your responsibility to train your replacement. Because literally one step in the door, you take one in the head, and now it's that guy's job. And if you haven't done an adequate job of transferring that information to the tribe, if you will, then you have let everyone down, right? So all information and everything has to be transferred over. So it's not just about me, right? Now our community, not our community, but our world, our popular culture is all me based, right? I want the credit. I want this. I want that, right? I want to be acknowledged for being good, for being badass, for being all these other things, right? And that's a very common thing in our culture because that's how we get rewarded. That's how we get praise. That's how we get money. But if you have other types of things that you're searching for, then, and money is not the number one thing, so to speak, meaning respect, loyalty, love, then it's not all about you, right? Otherwise, you would try and win every argument with your wife. And of course, we all know that that's a terrible formula for success and happiness, right? You may be right. You may win every single argument, but man, that's not going to be a very good formula. So it boils down to those three things, right? And across all the teams, no matter what branches the military are, even what levels they are, right? What tier of professional they are. It boils down to professional, to being prepared, having personal accountability, and a sense of tribe, right? Long live the brotherhood. So for 20 years, that's been my job, is analyzing what makes them do that and how that goes on, right? So how do we do that? How do we prepare them? Well, we start off with realizing that there are categories of preparedness, right? So first we say, well, it's mindset, right? I'll just boil it out. It's mindset, tools, training, and tactics, right? And if you'll notice, those are all pre-fight, right? Mindset, tools, training, and tactics. If you have the wrong mindset, then you'll spend all of your resources, which is time, money, things like that, in the wrong direction. We see this all the time in shooting. People realize that, man, this firearm would help keep me more safe and my family more safe. So I'm going to buy a firearm. And they buy some little snub-nosed thing that they can stick in their pocket because it's easy to carry. Meanwhile, they can't hit anything with it. Or they buy this big, giant, chrome 50 cal pistol that they can't manage that either, right? And so in fact, now they can't carry it because it's so big and so ugly. So, and the friends give them such a hard time about it. So what we have to do is we have to go, okay, mindset's going to determine what kind of training I'm going to seek out, what kind of tools I'm going to carry, who I'm going to associate myself with, how I'm going to conduct myself, and what I think is important and relevant. So I'm not going to spend a lot of because those are my resources. That's all I got. I don't have any more than that, right? So I have to protect those and make sure that they're all headed in a similar direction towards that particular goal, becoming more prepared, owning that personal accountability, and strengthening my tribe, right? And of course, tribe starts with self, because self directs family, right? And now I have a family, and now a group of families together equals a tribe, right? So we start with that mindset piece. That gets us in the right direction. Then we go to tools, right? Well, what kind of tools do I need? Well, there's a lot of different types of tools, right? And we can even classify this as weaponry because there's a lot of different forms of weaponry. That could be education, right? Any kind of force multiplier. If I'm trying to move something physically, trying to pick something up, and Dr. Keith comes and helps me carry it, that's a form of force multiplier. So on a very base level, it's very easy to see that Keith and I are stronger than I am by myself, right? And that simple principle of force multiplication, or force multiplier, is one of the common things that we're going to use throughout all the training that we do, right? A lever is a tool that allows me to lift more. Now, we take everything like that, because when you start talking about business strategies, you start talking about warfare strategies, you start about personal relationship strategies. A lot of those things are so dynamic and so fluid, and there's so many things and so coming from so many different directions that it can be very confusing. So what we do is we boil it back down to its simplest element: two people fighting for their lives, right? And those same principles that those people are going to be able to try and employ to be able to fight for their lives are the same principles that businesses, multi-billion-dollar businesses use, that governments use against one another, that families use against one another. Those same principles are applied, but we get to strip away all the movables and all the unessentials that confuse us, right? And so it's simple. We can just say, okay, well, the very first thing I'd want to do is pick up this salt shaker and throw it at the guy who's still 6 feet away. And while he's reacting to me throwing that salt shaker at his face, when he flinches, I'm moving forward to smash him, right? And I'm going to smash him with this plate, and then this chair, and then my boot, and then I get my family out, right? So the very first thing we look at, or I'm going to shoot him, right? Maybe I stand up and shoot him. The very first thing we look at is projectiles. The reason we use projectiles in interpersonal conflict, two people use it, is because it's safer and buys us time, right? Nations do the same thing, right? We're all trying to boil down to using the best force, the best space, and the best time that we have. Because everything, all of it boils down to force, space, and time. So that would be tools. Now, people want to buy tools and be done. The problem with that is it's software, not hardware. That's where it's most valuable, right? As evidenced by the fact that everyone here could lose their businesses, lose their families. As Dr. Keith has said earlier, you know, he's already lost all that over and over again. So have I, lost it over and over again. And if it had been about things, tools, things, we'd be crushed, it'd be over. But it's not about that. It's about the software, right? It's about what's in our heart and in our head that allows us to recover that and regain those physical things and regain that power structure. Because really all of those are weapons, right? Those are all what allow us to be more powerful. Money is just a tool that allows us to be more powerful. So training is where we get that, right? Training is where we get that. And then tactics. Tactics are fluid and they are forever, right? So how I use my tactics and how I adjust my business strategies, my personal strategies, my team strategies, and our country strategies. Those things are fluid depending on environment and opponent and assets, right? And so we're constantly moving those things and trying to be relevant at the time. And that was where tactics come in. So it's the actual application of the training and the tools. So that really is boils it down. There are some more time specifics. Obviously, we could go on and on. You know, but that's really what it boils down to: is mindset, tools, training, and tactics, which are mostly pre-fight, right? And so when I look at Navy SEALs and I say, okay, well, what is it that makes them most elite, and what is it that we all aspire to be? That's what it really boils down to: is those things, those similar things that fit in a wide variety of circumstances, and they're universal across the board. So, Dr. Keith, do you have any questions, or does anybody have any questions about anything? I can be happy to elaborate on any of that stuff, but I think that's probably about my time there.
Sure, brother. Let me ask you real quick. Harley, can you hear me okay?
I can, yes, sir.
Awesome. When it comes to the idea of real mindset, that what you've seen, I really love the things that you've talked about, especially the idea of force, space, and time. Can you give us an illustration about how any leader, whether it's in business or in marriage, or, you know, even a situation where you're at a gas station and someone rolls up on you? I mean, how do we apply that to life?
Well, it just so happens we're all living a great example of it right now. COVID-19 is an overwhelming force. We do not have the force to stop it. As a world, as a species, we do not have the force to stop it, not currently. So what we've decided to do is buy ourselves more time by creating more distance, right? And so by creating more distance, we've slowed the amount of force. We've slowed the speed at which that force of COVID-19 can be applied to us, right? And by slowing it down and buying ourselves more time, hopefully the plan is, according to our current species, is to build enough weapons to fight back against COVID, whether that's vaccinations or a slow roll to personal acclimatization, where we are no longer, as a species, as vulnerable to it. So that's a very simple one that we're all living right now. But force, space, and time really boils down to you are looking to try and maximize all three of those things. So if I have all the force in the world, but I can't move it fast enough, the other guy's just simply faster and quicker, then I'll never be able to apply my force. So a good example is cannons, right? If you're having to roll those cannons in the Civil War through the muck and the mud, by the time you got there, the guys were long gone, right? So that's a great force multiplier, but man, it has to be mobile. So what we did was we put them on turrets and made them tanks, right? And now they can get there quite quickly. And now that level of force is massive, right? That's a real problem. So, so for us, we can look at force and force multipliers as more than one person. I tell my wife all the time, don't travel alone. Even if you just have your teenage daughters with you or your friends with you, that's a simple. Two, carry some tools, right? So, and the tools you choose to carry might be a firearm, might be a blade, but a flashlight is an amazing force multiplier because it gives me a superpower. I can actually see in the dark, right? I'm like, you want a superpower? Yep. Okay, carry a flashlight. Now you can see in the dark. It's super simple, but it allows you to be able to have that. And space, of course, equals time. So space and time are very related. So if I don't have that space, all of a sudden the threat presents itself faster than I can react. It's inside my OODA loop, which is something created by Boyd from the United States military. And so, which means he's inside my reactionary gap. He can act on me faster than I can react to him. So by creating distance, when the threat appears to me, I now have time to react to it. Now, as a business, we can set that up by having things that alert us as soon as a threat exists, right? We do that all the time with having virus protection on our computers, so that when it pops up that little window and says, hey, you have a virus, you need to delete this, right? We have it on motion detector lights and security systems in our homes, so that when the alarm goes off, it's an early warning system that allows you time to, throw on your vest, your night vision helmet and all that, and grab your rifle and release the dogs and, all that great stuff, right? So it gives you time to get active and get in the game, right? Nobody wants to be woke up when a thug's jumping on your chest in the middle of the night and holding the knife to your neck, right? So no matter how much force you had, it's too late. You can't employ it. So you have to have a early warning system and distance and time created.
Good, thank you. We've got a couple questions from Jeff on that topic of space, force, and time. He's asked, how does this really apply to businesses, entrepreneurship? He said that would really be interesting to see if you've got a concept there.
Sure, yeah. So, well, as a business, right? So when we're looking at force can come in a lot of different things. Force can be part of an organization. Force can be part of having other businesses that you're working with, right? That's why we have associations and organizations. So that as the government starts to move and infringe on our rights as a business, that we have legislature and lobbyists that help slow that down. So those are us teaming together as a force, right? And we're buying ourselves time and distance until we can get things changed. So obviously finances is a force. So there's a lot of different ways, and really what we're trying to do is set up those early warning systems in our business so that as threats begin to appear in front of us, that we can start to put the pieces in place or recognize that those were being probed, right? So, and we all do it. Every business has an NDA agreement. Every business has an interview process because most of the threats come from within. There's a lot of different things that we can strategize that are already built in. We all have insurance. Insurance is a very simple way of saying, well, if this happens, I already have a defensive structure that's going to limit my liability. So, but when you take a look at it, you honestly say, okay, what are the force multipliers that we as a business have? And then how are we going to use that? And then how can we leverage those things to create more time? And distance to a threat or a goal, right? Those same things would be employed towards achieving a goal.
Good. Well said. Well said. Joey asked, at what frequency does one reevaluate your environment to know the appropriate force, space, and time formula to operate efficiently? That's
a great question, Joey. So in the organization and the team that I work with, we created what's called a de-escalation mindset, right? So again, we take everything, we put it back to its most base element, which is two people fighting for their lives. So if I step into a restaurant with my family, I'm a nice Southern gentleman. I open the door, my kids go in, my wife goes in, and then when I step in, I realize that there's 3 dead people on the floor, and there's a guy standing there with a shotgun, and he starts shooting other people. The problem with that is that I was still thinking about locking the car door or where we're going to do after that, or maybe I'm on my phone completely. Mentally, I am not present. I am somewhere else. And now I'm suddenly in a life and death situation. And so I go from being a 0 and the guy actually acting. He's actually on the action phase of, so he's already observed, oriented, and made a decision as an action. Now I'm in the very beginning. I'm observing what's going on. Then I have to orient myself to that. Then I have to decide what to do about that. Then put it in action. That is an enormous chain of events, right? Very difficult to be able to overcome. So, and so I'm behind the curve, mentally, emotionally, spiritually even, much less physically. I'm way behind the curve. So what we have to do is we have to put ourselves, if that's a level 10, I have to put myself at a level 8 every single time I cross a threshold. So every time I enter a new environment that I am not in control of and I have no idea what's going on, as I grab that door, I put myself in the mindset that as soon as I step across this threshold, I might have to shoot someone, right? And as I open the door, I'm scanning and I'm checking, I'm prying the door as it comes open, I'm scanning. And when I look inside there and I see people smiling and eating and laughing and in normal postures, I immediately drop back down to my normal face, right? And so I go in, I sit down at the restaurant. Every time the door opens, I look at it and I'm at an 8. I look at it and I go, does that guy need to be shot in the face? And he comes in and he's holding his kid and he's holding his wife's hand. And I go, nope, that guy does not need to be shot in the face. So it is a series of, I'm right here and I'm not at a 10. I'm not shooting anybody. I'm not putting my hand on my gun, right? I am just looking to assess, does that threat need to be addressed? And most of the time it's a no, right? Most of the time it's a resounding, disappointing no. But if that one time you step in the door, you do not want to be behind the curve, right? Most people realize that they're in an altercation when they get punched in the side of the head, right? They get a white light and they're like, whoa, and they find themselves on one knee and they're like, what has happened? And now they've got to fight through all this bewilderment and this confusion, right? And to realize, to put the pieces together. We don't want to find ourselves in that state, right? Now we can do the same thing, move that to a business, to a country, to a father, right? You don't want to be blindsided by the fact that your child's doing drugs, right? So I want to be maximizing my awareness, maximizing my situational awareness of myself, of the people. And to do that, what I'm looking for universally are anomalies, right? So there's a baseline that we all address. There's a baseline of movement. There's a baseline of dress. There's a baseline of facial expressions. There's a noise baseline. So if you go to a city like New York, you walk around, everybody's moving relatively the same pace down the sidewalk. Cars are moving normally the same equal space. Everybody's wearing similar things. There's a baseline noise. So what gets my attention, what I'm searching for is the anomaly. That anomalous behavior, that extremely fast movement, that extremely fast car, that really loud scream, We all hear kids scream and cry all the time, but we all recognize when it changes, right? If your kid starts crying, we all ignore most of it, but there's something that happens and we go, hey, that's different, right? And we all know it, right? There's a tone in your wife's voice that's different, right? That you go, huh, that's an anomaly. That only happens when this kind of thing occurs. And so we need to do that. We need to recognize those anomalous behaviors in our personal life for our security, in our business life for our security, in our family life for our safety, and for our presence of mind and comfort and baseline, family life. So that makes sense? Yeah.
Well done, brother. All right. Let's hear it for Harley. You guys clap silently. Woo!